Okay, we're up to part 2, chapter 8. This is an extremely central chapter, and I want to describe to you, in general, the thought that the chapter contains. It's a universal thought certainly in Kabbalistic works and in many philosophical works. And then I'm going to go through it and translate it for you line by line, because that'll be a good review, and certain nuances will come out. Well, let's start with a very simple and general observation. 1 second. Yeah. There are two principles that are associated with the way God runs the world. One is the principle of justice. Reward and punishment is justice. Your actions get the response that they deserve, what is appropriate for them. On the other hand, there's a principle of loving kindness. God created the world from a principle of loving kindness. The purpose of the creation was lahetiv luzalaso, to give good to that which is other than he. Now, on the surface, loving kindness on the one hand and justice on the other hand are contradictory principles. If you imagine any particular interaction in which, let's say, A gives something to B, it cannot simultaneously happen that what A gave to B was an expression of loving kindness and also an expression of justice. To say that what A gave to B was an expression of justice would mean that B earned it. It's his by right. Withholding it would be a crime. Maybe they signed the contract and he's a worker, and when A pays B his salary according to his work, there's no kindness in that, no love in that. He owes it to him, just paying his debts. If A is giving something to B is going to be an act of kindness, that requires that B hasn't earned it. It doesn't belong to him by right. The situation must be that if A changes his mind, decides not to give it to him, B has no complaint. So, on the surface, loving kindness and justice contradict one another. If we find both of these principles associated with the Creator, we have to do something. Maybe God takes turns, or maybe sometimes he does something else, a third thing, but you have to face the fact that they are contradictory to one another. Jewish philosophy, which includes the Kabbalah, says something which puts the problem right in your face. It says that the principle of justice is an implication of kindness. It's a corollary of kindness. It's a theorem based on the axiom of kindness. Kindness gives birth to justice. Now that, given what I've told you in straightforward logical terms, would be a contradiction. If A implies not A, then A is just false, and then there's no further use for it. But the situation is more complex and more subtle than that. If you take a look at the laws of charity, Maimonides has 8 different levels of charity. The 7th, which is the next to best, is anonymous charity, where the giver and recipient don't know each other. The reason why that is a very praiseworthy form of charity is because charity carries with it an implication. If A gives B charity, it means A is giving B money which is not going to be repaid. Why is he doing that? He's doing that because B isn't making it. B is failing. B is not providing for his own needs. So very often, unless we're talking about people who have been affected by a hurricane or something, very often there's an implication there that you're a failure. That's why, at very least, the giver and the recipient should know each other, so that the recipient shouldn't be embarrassed by coming in contact with the giver. And the giver shouldn't be tempted to look down on the recipient. That's why it should be anonymous. By the way, if you give someone a loan, and of course the giver of the loan, the recipient of the loan usually know each other. You could avoid that also because there are free loan societies and so on and so on, but usually they know each other. There's a very interesting halacha. Let's say the loan is a 30-day loan, and the 30th day has come, and the borrower has not paid. From then on, if the giver, the lender, is walking down one side of the street, and he sees the recipient, the borrower, walking up his side of the street, the lender has to cross the street to the other side. So he shouldn't meet him in the street, because the borrower may be embarrassed, because he hasn't paid the loan. So anonymity in cases where you're benefiting someone is definitely a virtue. But that's only next to top. The top level, the 8th level, is where you give someone a job. Now, when you give someone a job, the giver and the recipient do know each other. So you have to ask, why are we sacrificing anonymity, which we just said was a virtue in charity? And the answer is that the reason anonymity is a virtue in charity is a reason which, when you give a job, has been overcome inherently in the giving of the job. And therefore there's no reason for it anymore. There's no justification for it anymore. The reason why level 7, anonymity, is important is because of the inherent embarrassment of what? Of getting something for nothing. When you work at a job, you're not getting something for nothing. If it's a real job, you are creating much more profit for your employer than you are receiving in your salary. Otherwise, he wouldn't hire you. You're getting a benefit because without it, you don't have a job. You can't support yourself. So it's mutually beneficial. Now, let's consider what happens when you give someone a job. If you know people who are out of work, it's a terrible condition to be in. Socially, psychologically, in terms of your responsibility, your family, it's a terrible condition to be in. Someone gives someone a job, he's doing him a gigantic kindness, he's providing for him a gigantic benefit. But at the end of the week, when he makes out the person's paycheck, that's not kindness. That's justice. He worked for it, he deserves it, it's owed, and he's paying it up. Now, the kindness consists precisely in setting up a justice relationship. Because a justice relationship is the most beneficial gift that you can give to someone, because then he's not embarrassed by the money that he gets, because he earned it. So the way in which loving kindness gives birth to justice is by defining, first of all, the maximum quality of gift, and then realizing that the way you provide that maximum quality of gift is by setting up a continuous justice relationship. The motivation for the justice is loving kindness, and the motivation precisely because adopting a justice relationship actually produces loving kindness. That's how. So now, what happened in this piece of logic here? The reason we thought at the outset that justice and loving kindness are contradictory is because we were focusing on a single interaction. And there it's true. If the whole of the history of this relationship is going to be one occasion in which A gave something to B, then there is an absolute contradiction. It cannot be both loving kindness and justice. It can't be. But we're talking now about creating an ongoing relationship. And there, the kindest thing that you can do for someone is to provide him with an ongoing justice relationship. That's how justice is an implication of loving kindness. This is all in all the Svarim. This is something which is common and typical. Are we on the same page? I've explained it well? Okay, now, in this chapter, Ramchal wants to add two implications to this. In Luchadoidi, there's a phrase, Sof ma'aseh v'machshava tchila. That which is last in action is first in thought. This is a little quiz you could give to your intelligent 14-year-olds. What does this description describe? Last in action and first in thought. What's that a description of? Not butterflies, not marshmallows, not souffles, What is it a description of? The answer is, it's a description of a purpose. How do purposes interact with your behavior? Let's suppose a person is a sophomore in high school and he wants to be a doctor. What does he do? He says, I want to be a doctor. I'm going to have to get med school. And if I'm going to get a med school, I'm going to have to go to an undergraduate school, which has a good reputation of preparing pre-meds, like Johns Hopkins, where I taught. And now I'm in high school, so I have to get into John. I have to do well in Johns Hopkins. Now, how do I get to Johns Hopkins? I'm in high school. Well, 30% of the 270 faculty members that they had when I was there, 30 of them were members of the biology department. It's a little unbalanced for a full arts and sciences program because that's where they put their emphasis. This is a big biology school. If I can create a good biology record in high school, then I have a good chance of getting into Hopkins. Get into Hopkins, I'll get into medical school. Finish medical school, I'll be a doctor. Fine. Where has he started from? Doctor. Doctor is the end of the road. That's 25 years from now. But his thought process starts with the end. But machshava tchila, the first thing you think of is the end purpose for the entire effort. But then what you do is you say, well, if 25 years from now I'm going to be a doctor, you work backwards, all the stages, till you get to where your present is, and you start from where you are as a sophomore in high school. So the purpose, which you think of first, is last in action. Now, it's not just a question of first and last, but everything you do along the way is guided by the purpose. You don't say, okay, I've decided that I have to work on science projects in high school, that's it, forget about the medicine. Not at all. Suppose your high school suddenly switches to only particle physics science projects. Well, that won't help you as much as doing something in tracking medicines in the bloodstream. So maybe you look for a county-wide science project. And don't do it in the high school, because that'll be better for you if you want to get into a biology school. So the purpose is alive in your mind the whole time, and it guides the way in which you do the whole time. So that, and that may require changes in strategy or shifting your relative priorities in the strategy. If you find out that some courses in medical school will determine your internship and others there just because they're part of the curriculum, but they really don't matter, you'll know where to put your efforts into your studies. In the one you could tolerate getting a B or C, and the other ones you want to get A's. So the goal is a thought accompanying every stage of the process of getting to the goal. Now, what the Ramchal wants to describe in chapter 8 is the relationship between loving kindness on the one hand and justice on the other hand, which I've described to you in particular. And then he wants to draw two conclusions. And the conclusions are these. Since justice came into existence as a way of implementing loving kindness, when justice requires withholding, suffering, punishment, it's done Ka'asher av miyaseres beno, as it says, the pasuk says, as a father chastises his son. Not as an employer, just as an employee, not as an officer in the army chastises a recruit, not as the judge administers the people come in front of him for legal proceedings. No, it's like a father to a son, which means that, consistent with what he's trying to accomplish, the son should feel that this punishment is an investment from my father in my further development. And in particular, if he needs to punish me, he hasn't turned his back on me, hasn't rejected me. And this is a principle in Jewish child rearing. It's based on an incident in the Torah. Moshe Feinstein pointed this out. When Miriam, a few parshas ago, spoke against Moses and Aaron, and God, the Torah tells us God was angry, and she became leprous, and Moses pleaded for her, and God said, if she had disgraced her father, would she not have been treated with disgrace by the community? Let her exit the camp and spend a week outside the camp in disgrace. And then the Torah says at the last pasuk in the parsha says, and the people didn't travel for that whole week that she was outside the camp. Now, if you don't know the background, you think that was nice of them. You know, I mean, she's an important person and she has various merits and so forth and so on. They did this honor of not traveling while she's outside the camp. But that's dead wrong. Because as it says earlier in the parsha, they traveled on the basis of the cloud. The cloud that was over the Mishkan, when it went up, they traveled. And when it set in one place, they didn't travel. And it varied in the 40 years, 1 day, 2 days, 5 days, 10 days, 20 days, a month, or a year, or one place where they were for 19 years. So if the people didn't travel, it's because God didn't ordain a passage at that time. So then the Gemara asks, well, why not? What was God's purpose in not having them travel while she's outside the camp? The Gemara says, because decades before, when Moses was a child, a baby, and there was a threat to his life, and his mother said he should be put in a basket by the river, Miriam, who was, 6 years old, whatever it was, accompanied them to the river and hid to see what would happen. And when Pharaoh's daughter came and rescued Moses, she came out and said, maybe you would like a wet nurse for the baby because the daughter of Pharaoh wasn't lactating. And she arranged that Moses' mother, her mother also, would be the wet nurse, and she brought Moses back to the family. So, the Gemara reports, divine providence said, you waited for him. You waited to see what would happen and to help him, and you helped him. The people will wait for you also. Okay, fine, lovely. But why did God wait decades to pay her for that? Why is the gesture rewarding her for that exquisite action decades later? And said, I'll pat myself on the back. I thought of this myself, but I saw Moshe Feinstein said it, so now I know it's true. The other way I could credit my imagination, it might not be true. This way it's true. He said, because when you punish someone, you have to send a signal that you're punishing the action and not the person. So simultaneously with the punishment of sending her to isolation, God gave her a reward for something that she did that was good. That's the way you say, I still believe in you, I still trust you, I still going to invest in you, haven't turned my back on you, by providing the person with a gift in the midst of the punishment. Sort of like when you have an older brother, it's usually brothers, who is hitting his younger brother, and you say, you're hitting him, you can't be together with other people now, you have to go to your room. Okay, so he goes to his room. And 2 minutes later, you come up and say, maybe you'd like to read this while you're in the room. You can't come down. What you did was wrong, and you can't be together with other people right now. But I don't want you to be suffering totally. So I'll give you something to amuse you while you're in the room, so it doesn't hurt too much. That's a way of saying, I'm not against you. I'm only punishing what you did. So this is an element of a father chastising a child. He keeps in mind the fact that the purpose is to build the character of the child and to give him the greatest possible benefit. It's not coming out of anger on the parent and secondary misplaced identification with the child to fulfill the parent's hopes because the parent was a failure. None of that. It's the hope. So that's the first thing. The fact that the justice is an application of loving kindness means the way in which it's applied is with a flavor of the loving kindness of a father. That's number one. And number two, sometimes actually the disobedience of the generation is so great that it loses its claim on existing. Really, it should be wiped out. Total wipeout is off the books. God created the world to be a success, and if it has to go through bottlenecks where temporarily justice would say that it doesn't deserve to exist, that's the point at which the fact that justice is there as an offshoot of loving kindness plays a role. It's like a corporation. In this corporation, the CEO is kindness, and justice is one of the vice presidents. So the president is kindness, and the justice is one of the vice presidents. Well, the president may say to the vice president, I want you to institute these and these rules in this set of factories. Fine. But if instituting it and policing it means that the factories have to close down, then we're turning you off. Sorry, that wasn't what you were hired for. I know I told you about these rules, but not when they ruin the factories. The point of the rules is to improve the factories, not ruin them. So at that point, justice is held back and say, no, this far, you cannot go that far. We'll find a substitute. We'll spread out the penalties over a longer period of time. We're not going to allow the rules of justice to subvert the whole purpose of the enterprise, which was loving kindness. Those are the two implications that are carried by the fact that loving kindness is what is guiding the whole process while it's operating. Now, some of you, maybe on the recording, have learned about Gilui Yichud, the revealing of God's oneness and ubiquitous control of the world as the inner principle. That's true. That's another description of kindness. I'm not going to go there now because it's not in the Sefer. It's written about it in the Sefer. But I just, you know that there's no contradiction involved. It's another way of describing how the kindness is done. So don't think of that as a difficulty. Okay, that's my summary of part 2, chapter 8. I'm not going to go through it. Yeah.
Isn't there another aspect of how, I guess, strict judgments is kindness? I'm wondering how it relates this in the fact that to deserve something through strict judgments is better to receive it than through.
Well, yeah. This, what I know so far, I have told you from this forum. It's also quite obvious.
He's not referring to that.
I will make remarks which are psychologically obvious and are unjustly politically controversial, because they really are obvious and true, and anyone whose brain wasn't twisted by false ideology would know it right away. When a person earns something straight, there's a certain way of doing it, and he earns it straight, then he feels he got it by right. It confirms his self-image as competent, capable, having benefited from his efforts. If he gets it in a way where he didn't really earn it, then he doesn't have that build of his character, because he doesn't deserve it, but he doesn't have it. And also it creates doubt in the minds of other people when they know that he got that special dispensation. They know they don't treat him equally, with equal respect as someone else who got it on his own. And it perpetuates a kind of victim status. So instead of saying, well, if you come from a certain ethnic group and everybody's taking the exam and the passing grade for everybody else is 70, for you the passing grade is 60. But then he knows that if the rules had been applied to him the way they're applied to everybody else, he'd have failed. So he doesn't get the compensation. If you tell me you want him to pass, put greater effort into training him so that he really passes. Rabbi Lazarus, who used to be in charge of the Derech program here, had a beautiful methodology for the exams that he gave. He said, everyone on my exams gets 80 or better. Everyone, always. I said, really? How do you manage that? He said, I'll tell you, very simple. If he gets less than an 80, I write on his paper where he made a mistake what the right answers are, and he takes the exam over. And he can take the exam as many times as he likes, as many times as he wants. He takes the exam 6 times, but on the 6th time, he knows it. So the final marker for the exam is true. It's true. Now he knows it. No one's going to keep record how many times he had to take it. That's the way you build people. Not by allowing them to pass at 60 when everybody else has to get 70. That's not how you build people. That's how you destroy people. So there's, again, an example of how using a justice standard gives you a much better outcome than giving the false kindness of just giving the person without his earning it. This is a general principle of building people, building character, building values and principles in interacting with people. Now, can there be exceptions? There can always be exceptions, but for the vast majority of people, this is the best thing to do. Okay. Did I change my glasses? No, I did not. Here we go. Okay. What we have to analyze and be aware of in God's providence, that everything is based on a system of mishpat and din. Mishpat is justice, and din is strict accountability. As the verse says in Psalms, Shevet Mishor, Shevet Malchusecha. The rod of straightness and correctness is the rod of your kingdom. And it says, Mishpat Yamid Oretz, the king through Mishpat, justice, establishes the earth, sets the earth up. So the expression of God's interaction is an expression of justice. However, we know that in truth, God's desire is only to benefit. And he loves his creatures like a father who loves a son. But because of the love itself, it is appropriate for the father to chastise, to criticize, to correct, and sometimes even punish his child in order to benefit him in the end, to increase what he will be able to accomplish. Even if you put it in terms of happiness, which I think is a mistake, but even if you put it in terms of happiness, generally there's a much greater outcome of happiness. People who know that they got free gifts along the way, don't end up happy people, satisfied people, people with a healthy pride in what they do. In order to justify where they are, they have to continuously emphasize their victim status. That's why they're getting all these special handouts, because they're really victims. So they go through life with 16 chips on their shoulder, not just one, and looking out for the next aggression against them, so that they can justify where they're getting the handouts, so that they don't have to face the fact that they didn't earn it. That's not healthy. That's not really happy. As my wife said, looking at what's going on in the United States, there are some people who need someone to hate. There has to be someone to hate. Hatred is the only mode of expression that they feel comfortable in, that they feel justified in. That's tragic. That's not happy. Shouldn't be proud of that. That's a person with a very serious problem. And the verse that I quoted to you from Sefer Dvarim, Ki kasher yaser ish es beno, Hashem lekechem yasreka. As a father chastises his child, so Hashem chastises you and reproves you. So he says, that being the case, the very purpose of the very principle of Mishpat comes from the source of its being love. And the chastisement and punishment of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of God, is not like the blow coming from an enemy or someone who's taking revenge. Rather, it's the chastisement of a father who wants the best for his child, as we explained. Now, from this, two consequences follow. One is that the chastisement itself will be sweetened, not hard and cruel. The love itself will, now, limzog in Hebrew means to mix. When you, in ancient Israel, 2,000 years ago, times of the Gemara, I don't know what it was physically actually, but wine was stored in such a way that if you didn't dilute it 3 parts water to 1 part wine, it was dangerous to drink. So limzog means to mix two elements together. And he says the love with which the mishpat is administered adds to it this sweetening. That's one thing that happens. Now, I just want to stop to comment. This is a relative matter. You may look at an event and see suffering, and you may not see in it any sweetening. at all. To you, it just looks like pure suffering. So one point is that you don't know what the alternative was. You don't know how much worse it could have been. Let's suppose a person is suffering terrible physical pain, but his family's there. And they're giving him support and love and caring for him. Well, that's not pure pain. There are people who suffer that kind of pain and families aren't there, like soldiers who are wounded in a battle 5,000 miles away. So you don't know what the alternative was and how much worse it could have been. I mean, we think of surgery, rightly, as something which, if you can avoid it, you should avoid it. But just think back 200 years when there was no anesthetic. That meant they cut you up and you were conscious. And you felt it. That was much worse, wasn't it? So, number one, when you think that it isn't being sweetened, it doesn't seem to be sweetened, you have to think what the alternatives are. And secondly, you have to think what the alternatives are with respect to the purpose at hand. And I'll give you an example where this is also based on a certain Kabbalistic principle. I don't know if I'll tell it to you or not. But sometimes the sweetening has to be hidden. I'll give you an example. You're walking with your 5-year-old child, and you have told your 5-year-old child you're not old enough to cross the street by yourself. So you only cross when I tell you you can cross. But he's bouncing a ball as he goes along, and the ball gets out of his hand, and it's rolling into the street, and he forgets about what you told him, and he's starting to go into the street. Okay, you're going to forcibly remove him from the street. How are you going to do that? You're going to catch him by the back of his jacket and say, listen, really, that's not such a good idea. Remember I told you shouldn't do that? I'm your father. I mean the best for you. So come with me. Come with me. We'll go to the street. If we don't get the ball, I'll get you another one. And you gently persuade him to come to the street. Don't do that. Don't do that. You grab him by the back of his jacket. You pick him up off his feet. You yell at him, "No! Not in the street!" And you hope he'll remember it. Because you do it gently, he's not going to take it very seriously. And if he doesn't take it very seriously, you're putting him in danger. Because next time when the ball goes in the street, the "come with me, we should really go to the sidewalk" isn't going to stop him. But the no will stop him. And you want him to live. So expressing your love and kindness for the child when you want to make an impression that this can't be done may defeat the purpose of getting the result that you need to get. So then the mituk has to be hidden. It may be accompanied by something else an hour later, where you go out of your way to do something nice for the child. And although the child might not associate it in his own memory, but his feelings will register it. He felt before frightened, he felt before distanced, and an hour later you do something to bring him close, to give him some special experience or something. So you repair the closeness with the child. That's the mituk, that's the sweetening of it. You wouldn't have done that thing an hour later were it not for the fact that you yelled at him to stay out of the road. But the father has to do it sometimes by hiding the kindness, because the kindness means that the child won't take it seriously. There was a paper in the Journal of Philosophy, maybe 20 years ago, a very interesting paper. There are two main theories of punishment in philosophy, at least in Anglo-Saxon philosophy. One is utilitarian, which is by far the more favorite theory today. I don't think rightly, but that's another question. One is it should serve a purpose. If it's incarceration, it should serve the purpose of rehabilitation. If it's deprivation, it should serve the purpose of changing the child's behavior or the adult's behavior for the better. Think of it in terms of a way to get out better consequences. That's called utilitarian punishment. The other is retributive. You did it, you deserve a slap. You did something terrible, you deserve to suffer. Because you did something bad, you deserve to suffer. I don't care whether it makes you better or worse. You need this. Justice demands that you did such a thing, you get hit. Of course, that's not popular today. People have all sorts of, politically glib discussions of the subject. But this fellow, I forget who it was, probably could look it up, wrote a paper in which he said there's a third function of justice. I wouldn't say a theory, but a function of justice. And that's communication. When you say to someone, this is terrible, it's forbidden and it's terrible, or you say it as a society, describe it as a terrible crime. And then, when a person commits the crime, the punishment is a $25 contribution to the city coffers. They are not going to believe you that it's terrible. They will not take it seriously. The punishment that you prescribe communicates the real value that it has. You can't express the value. You can't communicate the value unless you put a strong punishment on it. I think that's right. I think the way that you treat people who violate it gives an indication of what you think of it. When you have district attorneys all over the United States who say, we don't punish these and these crimes, the result is that when people commit those and those crimes, they feel no guilt whatsoever. Because the DA is not going to prosecute, that means it isn't really wrong. It's written on the law books, but so what? Just like, for example, at a 55 mile an hour speed zone, you know very well they're not going to start pulling people over till 65 miles an hour. How do you feel when you drive 60? You don't feel like a crook. You don't feel like a criminal. If they're not prosecuting 60, then that means they don't really care about it. And I don't feel like I'm like a guilty person breaking the law, because they themselves aren't serious about it. So I think that the idea is to communicate something here. I'll tell you something else since we're talking about this. I mean, you asked us in general. There was a guy named Chaim, I think he pronounced his name Ginot, G-I-N-O-T, an Israeli psychologist. And he had a theory that when we tell train children, and we tell them that's wrong and that's right, wrong, right, good, evil, there's nothing in that, it's really relative, there's nothing objective about it. What we're really saying is, I don't like it. I don't like it. So he said, I recommend you be honest. Be honest. Don't tell your child that when the music is playing not to make noise because it's wrong. Tell them, I don't like it. And you can teach him by your behavior that when I say I don't like it and you keep doing it, there are consequences. And he'll learn that. He'll learn there are consequences. And then he'll learn what he has to do. That is, at least if he doesn't want to suffer the consequences. That's more honest, it's more true, it's not based on a false theory that there are really values and the values are really right? So I read part of the book and I was considerably impressed. I showed it to my first wife and she said, you can't teach values that way. Values are not you pleased so-and-so or didn't please so-and-so. Values are what is right and wrong. Now, Ginat knew what he was doing. He didn't believe in values. That's more corrupt. That's utterly corrupt. If someone would attack him about his book, all of a sudden the values would come out right away. But leave that aside. You can't communicate values by simply saying that bothers me when you do that, and if it didn't bother me, then we'd be perfectly all right. Sorry, it's not true. Anyway, so that's the idea of communication. So here, the application of chastisement and justice and punishment is with a softening and a sweetening because it's coming from a father, but with intelligence that has to be done in such a way that's not inconsistent with the goal of the entire process. Okay? Now comes the second consequence. There are times when the hour requires it, that the Master, blessed be He, will pass over the what's in Hebrew is the line of judgment, which means the demands of what the principle of justice would require entirely, and He will run the world with mercy, as it says, the famous verse in Exodus, I shall be graceful to whom I shall be graceful, and I shall be merciful to whom I shall be merciful. Meaning, this is not subject to your actions. I have a principle of grace and mercy which is not justified by your actions. It's not required by your, and doesn't depend upon your actions. Because I'm running the world, and this ingredient is necessary for the world to achieve the purpose that I want for it, so that's what I'm doing. Now, Since God created the world in such a way that man should have free will control over his actions, and according to strict justice, there should be a compensation for his actions, to pay the person according to his actions. By doing that, it's as if God made himself subject to the actions of human beings. This is a very deep point. That he will not benefit them, nor deprive them or punish them, except according to their actions. Now, here we have to be very, I'm saying that from what he says, but I don't have a chance to finish his translation today. We'll do it tomorrow. There's a certain way that we talk, and sometimes it has false implications, and have to be careful not to be misled by it. I'll give you an example. Why did God harden Pharaoh's heart? Because God wanted to punish him. Now, if a person does tshuva, he can't be punished. So, if that's the case, if God wants to punish him for sure, then he has to harden his heart so he won't do tshuva. Otherwise, he won't get the punishment. He'll escape the punishment. So God had to harden his heart. Now, if you have an ear for vocabulary, God had to, he didn't have any other choice. I mean, what exactly are we saying here? No, the principle is very simple. God chose to make tshuva paramount. He set up the principle that if you do tshuva, you'll be forgiven no matter what. For whatever reasons, he had to do that. Consistent with his own principle, it follows that if he wants to punish Pharaoh and doesn't want him to escape it, he will have to take away his free will, because otherwise, according to his own primary principle, he won't be able to punish him. So we're not setting limits on God. We're simply saying when God takes a decision, so then that decision has implications. And if he's going to live up to that decision, then that may structure the options he has for acting in particular circumstances. So when God sets up justice, and then there are times when God, so to speak, ignores or overrules justice as a whole, you have to ask, where is that coming from? Didn't he set it up? And if he set it up, why is he overruling it? And the short answer, is your hand up for a question? Okay. The short answer is, yes, he set it up. He set up justice, but he set up justice as an implementation of a higher principle. He didn't set it up to exist on its own. So if he set it up as a way of implementing a higher principle, and then circumstances arise in which the application of justice will subvert the higher principle, then it's his higher principle which requires overlooking justice. So again, it's a matter of him applying his principles in a way that respects the hierarchy of priorities. And it's not as if he's constrained and he couldn't do otherwise and so forth and so on. He chose the principles, and this is the implications of the principles. If you think that God doesn't have to obey logic, that's a separate issue. We've talked about it a number of times. I'm not going to do that today. That's a mistake, but I'm not going to do it today. Anyway. So this is basically what he says. So God limits himself. He wants reward and punishment, for whatever reason. By one reward and punishment, it means what he does to us is dependent upon us. Now, so if you look at it from the outside, you say, what? The creator, all-powerful manager of the universe is subject to our actions? Our actions determine what he does? If you look at it that way, you must see the point. He's decided that reward and punishment, which are based on justice, is an important way to interact with the world. Reward and punishment means that you give a person according to his actions. So it's his decision that generates the outcome, not as if we force it. But superficially, it appears as if he's subject to other conditions. However, in truth, the Master, blessed be he, is not really subject to any law and not subject to anything outside of himself. And now I never noticed this before, but he uses Rambam's language. Rambam writes this at least 6 times in the Moreh Nevuchim. Eino v'lo mispa'el mishum davar. He is not affected by anything outside of himself. And therefore, when he wants to override justice, nothing stops him from overriding justice. Now, nothing stops him, but then you have to ask, what is the motivation? And I described to you the motivation, because justice is number 2, and loving kindness is number 1. When justice would interfere with loving kindness to a great extent, then number 1 asserts itself. So his having chosen justice as 2 leaves him leverage to override it when necessary. Whereas, when in the case of Pharaoh, when God chooses tshuva, I should have translated this loosely and wrongly translated as repentance. When he chose to make repentance number 1, then there's no way out. If you choose to make it number 1 and you give him free will, then it's very well possible that he won't you won't be able to punish him. So then there won't be any way out. It's the Seder Adifuyot, as they say in Hebrew. It's the order of priorities that determines when a principle can be compromised or overlooked, or when it cannot. This is only a page and a half, but we'll get back to it tomorrow. Questions before I leave? Okay.